Hi, and welcome to the Rare Business Podcast. My name is Adrian Swinsko, and I'm a consultant, advisor, researcher, and writer on all things related to customer service and customer experience. Through this podcast, I seek out and interview CEOs, entrepreneurs, business and tech leaders, and leading thinkers about what it takes to build organizations that produce better outcomes for both customers and employees in this fast-moving modern age that we live in. If this is your first time listening to one of these interviews, then welcome, and please do dive into the archives at adrianswinsco.com, as I've now completed over 250 of these interviews in the last few years. If this is not your first time listening, then thank you for returning, and I'll aim to do a good enough job to keep you coming back week after week. Anyway, that's enough from me right now. Let's get into the interview. So, welcome to the next edition of the Rare Business Podcast. With me today, I have Antony Brydon, who is the CEO of Directly, a leader in support automation. Hi, Antony. How are you doing?
It's good to be here this morning.
Perfect. So, Antony, what I always do on these podcast interviews is ask people to tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do first and foremost, just so we get an understanding of who we're talking to. Who's the person behind the voice?
So I'm Antony Brydon. I'm the co-founder. I'm the CEO of a company called Directly.
Mm-hmm.
My background is customer experience. I worked with many large telco call centers back in the day and contact centers kind of early in my career. And my company, Directly right now, helps other companies launch and train virtual agents.
Okay.
To deliver very high quality automation by pulling humans and experts into the loop and systemically embedding them in the AI and automation process.
Perfect. I mean, so I want to dig into that because I want to understand how that works, because there's a lot of other people talking about it. It's in a sort of similar sort of space to you, but are saying slightly different things and not necessarily sort of emphasizing the human part of it. So let's dig into that a little bit later. But let me come to something that you've been quoted as saying is that you said that the future of customer service is in conversational AI. Now, I've heard a lot of people talk about conversational kind of marketing and and interfaces and things. I mean, what do you mean by you think the future of customer service is in conversational AI?
Well, I think that I'll start with the conversational part.
Okay.
I think when I started working in customer service, customer experience, it was the mid-late 90s.
Mm-hmm.
And there was always this tension between the company and the end consumer, the customer. And they wanted fairly different things with respect to how they interacted.
Mm-hmm.
And a classic example would be, that companies for many, many years tried to get their customers to wean them off the phone, which is a very expensive support channel.
Sure.
And customers kept sticking and saying, that is the channel that we're used to. That is the channel that we like. So for 20 years, there was that tension and that battle between what the consumer wanted and what the company wanted. Now, we're at this, on the conversational side, we're at this really interesting point in 2020 because the phones that we hold in our hands every day turn out not to be phones anymore. They turn out to be asynchronous messaging devices. And the dominant applications on those phones are text messaging and WhatsApp and Snapchat and Facebook Messenger. Mm-hmm. And they're digital messaging. Mm-hmm. So here you've got a point in time where the companies want to get their customer off the phone into these digital conversations. And the customer, for the first time, prefers that and is used to that as a mode. Right. And that is a magic moment. And that is why we are seeing the digital conversations, asynchronous messaging, explode as a means of companies and consumers connecting. Okay. So I think that piece is there. And then once the conversational moves to a digital conversation, there for the first time, you can apply all sorts of intelligence to delight the user very quickly. So that's a new era. I think the conversational piece of it, the asynchronous messaging piece of it is done.
Right.
I think that train has left. And the AI and the ability to put smart virtual agents is emerging, right. But one that we are bullish on.
Okay. And so What is it kind of, because I mean, we could say putting AI into conversations. I mean, in short speak, you could say that could be intelligent agents, chatbots, those type of things. But you're sort of talking about more than that. I mean, what's your view on the existing applications of AI and customer service, particularly around the sort of the whole some of the chatbots and things? I mean, where are they going wrong, do you think?
So we do think they're going wrong. We do think that this generation of AI and automation, be it the fourth or the fifth or whatever you want to look at historically,
Yeah.
is very different than the prior four.
Okay.
So we believe this is going to be the greatest and a meaningful generation when it comes to that technology. But you're right. It is nascent and it is early in that generation. And what we see industry wide is that the applications that we love and hear about, the Alexas, the self-driving cars, they work on web scale data.
Right.
Enormous billions and hundreds of billions of data points.
Right.
When you come to a customer service organization, even the largest customer service organizations, you're in the world of small data, tiny fractions of data. And the data gaps, the data quality gaps, the amount that can be kind of invested in these systems is limited, and it is leading to lower success rates and lower ceilings on what automation and AI can do today.
So what are you doing actually to bridge that gap? Because that's it. I mean, I think you mentioned it, you kind of refer to it as like this, how is it you mentioned, is it called the cold start problem? Because that's all about the kind of the data. So if you don't actually have this, I don't know, swimming pools or warehouses or planets kind of full of data. I don't know what the kind of terminology is these days, because it always seems to be getting bigger in terms of the amount of data you need. But like, how do you bridge that gap to almost like jumpstart the initiative in many ways, in the absence of all that huge amount of data that other applications need?
So whether it's jumpstarting it, or sustaining it on an ongoing performance basis, or maximizing the performance, we do it the same way, which is to inject these networks of subject matter experts into the loop. And what that means is, whether it's a customer like Xbox and thousands of their expert gamers, or a customer like Airbnb and thousands of their 5-star Airbnb hosts, we help a company build those networks of subject matter experts, folks that know the company and the product inside and out, and then reward those experts for training the AI, for creating content, for automations, for answering customer questions, and for systemically making the AI work and work from scratch.
So let me see if I'm getting this kind of right. Is that so? In order to, if you like, jumpstart or to kickstart the program, you are recruiting expert human beings to handle many of these kind of queries, to create the data that allows the AI allows you to gather data, that allows the AI to learn, and therefore you end up with this kind of balance which goes, it's heavy on human intervention to start with, but over time the AI intervention is going to grow over time as it learns. Is that right?
It's very close. We don't have to spend a lot of time recruiting, because most of the companies we work with have these deep pockets of talent in and around. They've got resellers, they've got integrators, they've got expert users, they've got administrators and advocates, and affiliates and all. So there are most companies, have those large ecosystems of talent around. And those aren't just people; those are people with unfair knowledge and advantage, of insight into the product and how they work and the like. To your second point, how systemically the experts in the loop changes over time. Yes, in the beginning when you're standing up a system, the ability to draw on those experts and those people for creating the content and training the automations is very high. But what a lot of people don't realize is that most of the models, the machine learning models, will trail off very quickly if not being constantly and systemically retrained. And I make the example of an Olympic runner. You know, an Olympic runner runs 30 hours a week, 100 miles a week, just to maintain that 4-minute mile pace, that high level of performance. They can't just go on vacation for 2 months, or their performance starts immediately trailing off. They have to keep training 20, 30, 40 hours a week just to sustain that level of performance that they've achieved. And these networks are very similar. So they need constant retraining to perform at peak levels. And those peak levels can be, millions and millions of dollars.
So are you saying, therefore, because this is potentially on the, this is probably exploding a myth in many ways, because a lot of times people kind of talk about, when they talk about AI systems, and particularly assistance in this type of space and self-service, that actually there's an implication that it becomes completely automatic and possibly eliminates a human intervention. But what you're saying is, if you want that peak performance, you have to get that blend right on a sustained basis.
Yes, I think that's right. You've got to. I think that we can have legitimate and good debates about the degree to which experts need to be in the mix over time. And I think that percentage, it'll vary by industry, it'll vary by type of year. The fact of the matter is, when the system is destabilized by a new product release, by a new marketing release, by a new effect, those are areas where the system has to adapt, and the human networks are invariable and come into play in much greater degree. But I think there are fewer and fewer people arguing that it is full automation and generalized intelligence and pure adaptive learning. That won't be this generation. That'll be a future generation.
Yeah, and we might not get to the Matrix kind of anytime soon. But so the other thing I was thinking about was, you have this distributed network that is feeding and training the AI, and as you say, it will vary according to I guess the number of new product releases, of the variety that's inherent within a business or an industry, and so on and so forth, how that changes over time. That's confined. So, but with that distributed network of, if you like, expert agents or people that are inputting into it, how do you manage sort of QA and oversight and all of that? So, because it's very clever. It's also incredibly complex as well in terms of managing those inputs and outputs and things.
So with a human network and with a peer network, you can build heuristics that are good at driving quality. And I'll give you a contrast. In a lot of systems to date, the only kind of machine level arbiter of quality has been a customer rating. When you think about a fax that is posted on the web, and the customer asks, did this solve your problem? Yes or no. Was this helpful? Yes or no. Well, or the customer gets a response from a system and they're asked, did it help? That is possibly the lowest quality feedback system that I have kind of observed and that I can imagine, for two reasons. One, we find the customer is often voting their emotion, and the system may say, you're not entitled to a refund. Technically correct.
Yes.
Downvoted, not particularly appreciated. And the customer, simply by virtue of asking a question of something that they don't know about, is not necessarily the best arbiter of correct and incorrect. So you've got somebody that is definitionally not a subject matter expert in the narrow domain that they're asking about, with a lot of competing intents for the quality of the rating. In our system, when an answer is delivered by a given expert, we're able to go out to other peer experts that have high reputations in that exact cluster on that exact topic. And like a Quora, like a Stack Overflow, like a lot of these web-based systems that we've been inspired by, get a higher estimation of quality. Is it perfect? No. Is it network driven, peer rated, and expertise related? Yes.
Yes.
So is it perfect? No. Is it better? Yes.
Right. And therefore, almost like because of the peer dimension, and also, I guess, that your ability to iterate on things and therefore make iterative improvements, you end up converging towards a quality answer and quality inputs.
You do. You also get network effects, where the denser the network gets, the more accurate the ratings become.
Right.
And that is not the case in most of the classical rating systems, which are one-to-one and kind of don't have network effects in them.
Fascinating. I really like that. But actually, to bring it down to, if you like, sort of brass tacks, because I could jump into the sort of technology and the kind of the system and the network and things, and we could all, I'm sure we could probably get lost in that. But actually, if I think about the people that listen to this podcast, they're probably more less in the technologist sort of space and more in the practitioner type of sort of space.
Yep.
In service and experience. And so, I mean, if we bring it down to, say, like brass tacks or kind of reality, I mean, can you give me a couple of examples of companies that have adopted this whole directly expert network approach, and sort of, what problem they face, what do they do, how long does it take to set up, kind of what sort of results they've seen, as a way of almost making what you're doing kind of real, as it were.
Right. So brass tacks, what this boils down to is when AI is intelligently applied, when we use the networks to drive it, we can make messaging and automation work at scale. And what do I mean by that? When companies roll out messaging, it comes with a bit of trepidation, because it is so easy for customers to ask a question, and those channels are so ubiquitous, they can be immediately overwhelmed.
Sure.
Well, these networks are what allow very quick response times, very elastic response times to make messaging that promise work.
As an interesting point, I spoke to somebody the other day, and they were talking about something, the variety and the unappreciated variety that exists in very, very simple requests. Somebody asks I'd like information on this or that or something. Yep. And what they found out through their investigations and tracking of customers, they found out their customers would I think it was asking somebody to do with banking or something, and somebody wanted to know their balance. But what they found through experience is that there's customers have somewhere in the region of 200 different ways that they can use to ask for their balance of their bank account.
It's staggering. The related stat that I am always fascinated by today, in 2019, 20 plus years after Google's search engine and search box rolled out,
right,
15 to 20% of the queries in that search box have still never been seen before.
Really?
Billions of searches a day. Yet a little of it, some of it's obvious. When you look at those software systems that detect term papers and whether they've been plagiarized or not,
right?
They need 13 words to have a 90%, confidence that this is a plagiarized term paper of a 40-page term paper. But yes, 15 to 20% of the Google searches have never been seen before. It's a pretty short box, and it speaks to the fluidity of language. And the challenges that have led the first 4 generations of AI, to stumble, if you will. Back to your initial question.
Exactly.
When kind of brass tacks, when a company rolls out a network of experts, because those are ecosystems near them, it's relatively easy to invite, and skill test and qualify those initial experts in. Those experts earn cash rewards on an average of $200 a week for creating the content and starting to train the machine systems with training phrases and the like. And then they also answer customer questions. When the virtual agent can't answer a question,
right,
even when it doesn't have the content, when it doesn't have the training phrases, a highly matched, highly ranked expert can answer that question and then create an automatic answer that's trained. So when our systems go in, they can handle anywhere from 10 to 50% of a support center's volume. They typically do it with CSAT of the automations that the experts are building,
right?
That exceeds the CSAT of just a pure machine delivery system by 10 or 20 CSAT points. So we see 10 to 20 point bumps in CSAT when the automations are curated and trained by experts versus strictly delivered by machines.
Yeah.
We do this all while taking 50 to 85% of the cost per case out of the equation. So some of our larger customers are solving up to 50% of their support volume, bumping CSAT by 20 points, and saving over $20 million a year right now and growing.
So it's basically cheaper and better and faster all around.
I think there's two things, like the triangle, that the cheaper, better, faster. Yes, it succeeds on that, but that's still incrementalism and quantitative.
Yeah.
When we talk about, and it is the proof, but when we talk about messaging and automation working at scale, that's qualitative, and that is a phase shift. I think this generational, this 2020 shift from 20 years of choose your own adventure, letting the customer choose their mode, their channel, regardless of whether it is optimal for their, experience, and having the company have this stovepipe, and patchwork quilt of systems, replacing that with these conversational interfaces, with these paradigms that are more intuitive and can be scaled up. I think that's a big deal to change it. I don't put another way. I don't think you can take the 20th century model to customer support and optimize it into something successful. I think this, we're not in a game of optimizing those old models. We're in a game of moving to fundamentally new systems, fundamentally new interaction models, and challenging a lot of that 2000 status quo.
Yeah, I think so what you're doing reminds me of something that I can't remember the exact name of the company, but I spoke to them. I think it's probably somewhere in the region like 5 years ago or something. And what they were doing was similar, but not with the AI element. It wasn't applied to sort of service and support and building out that sort of the knowledge, as it were. What they were in that sort of assisted commerce sort of space. The idea being, particularly in a considered purchase, when somebody was investigating a considered purchase. So because it started with a guy that was trying to buy a wetsuit for scuba diving. And he was trying to buy it online, and he couldn't quite fit because they're all kind of slightly different kind of fits. And he wanted to speak to somebody because he didn't want something that was too tight on the thighs because it would chafe and so on and so forth. And so figured out that actually there's people that buy these things have way, way more knowledge than any sort of like rep, because they have user knowledge, like real life in the world kind of user knowledge. And I thought that was really interesting, and it was like ahead of its time. And I still think there's a view kind of for it, and there's a space kind of for that, but I don't know if they're around very much anymore. But I really like the idea that the tapping into this sort of expert knowledge, because the knowledge isn't fixed, like you say, and it becomes this organic, always evolving thing. And I think that's the really smart thing, and how because there is this, as you say, there's this illusion that you can optimize something which is based on a certain current set of assumptions, that it's fixable, but it's not it's not necessarily fixable because you're assuming that it's set, and it's not set. It's experience has shown is that it's changing all the time, and that's why we can't keep up. Right?
I think you're right. We were not gonna optimize the gasoline engine, into the electric car.
Yeah.
That wasn't going to be a continuous evolution, and that's a discrete jump and a discrete bump. And yes, to your analogy, if you think of these networks and people as these adaptive engines, that they embedding these networks into the systems, is what we think is ultimately the formula. It's a different contrast. As I said, We're bullish on automation to do a lot of it.
Yes.
I disagree with the high school dance version of humans over here, machines over here.
Yes.
Different folks doing different tasks. I think it's not the grade school dance. It's the high school dance. They're intermingled.
Yeah. No, completely. It's not a. It's not strictly a sort of a complete, like jigsaw piece in that you have defined edges, as it were. It literally is intertwined.
That's right.
Perfect. So, which is very different to a lot of the things that are getting talked about kind of out in the market in terms of other, conversational interfaces, kind of AI, that chatbots, that type of stuff. I mean, given your experience, and I don't want it to limit it just to the messaging, but I guess that's where we're what we're talking about right now. But given that you're heavily into the industry, given that you are talking to lots of different people and seeing lots of different people try things, succeed, fail, try something else, so on and so forth. What would be your, say, best advice to somebody that was thinking about wanting to expand the use of say messaging as an interface in the business? What's one of the first things that they should be thinking about?
It's a good question. I think you're talking about moving from paradigm to paradigm, and I think the most important lesson is to recognize when you're moving to messaging, you are moving to a different paradigm. I've seen a lot of companies use the word messaging, but get trapped in the 20th century paradigm of chat.
Right.
So what do I mean by that? Well, on one lens, you can say that an asynchronous message, when both parties are there and they're delivering really quickly, it looks a lot like chat. Mm-hmm. If you were looking at a screencast of it. Mm-hmm. The reality is that the expectations of asynchronous messaging are pretty darn different. Right. When I text you on my phone, I don't leave that text app open, waiting for you to text me back in 30 seconds. I know you're in a meeting. I know you're on the go, mm-hmm. And there's a different mode there. So if a company implements messaging and they're looking at a provider, and 13 to 14 second, initial pickup, mm-hmm. On a messaging channel, well, they've blunted a lot of the advantages that messaging can deliver. So the first thing is these white sheets of paper. As we move through these two things, they do need to be white sheets of paper, mm-hmm. And that is probably the most prescriptive message to recognize that automation in a smart messaging channel is not a redeployment of an IVR model that you had from 20 years ago.
Oh my God! And that is a common piece of understanding.
Yeah. And that an asynchronous messaging channel is not a new word, a new catchy phrase for a chat channel.
Yeah.
That is number one. Because if you're running at a virtual assistant, in an asynchronous messaging channel, as an IVR, type functionality in a chat paradigm, there's no point.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah, because it is funny. It's funny how people, almost like in order to understand something, they make big assumptive leaps and they go, oh, it's like that, therefore it must be the same as this. So, like to your IVR point,
one of the most fun presentations I've seen was a presentation that Jeff Wartgau, a product marketer expert in the space, gives. It's called "Look at Your Kids."
Right.
And it is to often to a room full of CX leaders, mm-hmm. And it is folks who have 20 or 30 years in the domain, and is saying for these new emerging models, whether it is the comfort interacting with automated systems, whether it is the asynchronous messaging on the phone, those are folks that are not bringing the old paradigms with them and trying to cram the new technologies into their old mental models of how things should work. So that's some of the best counsel that I've ever heard.
Perfect. That's really interesting. And we covered kind of, skipped across quite a bit of ground. Was there anything that you'd like to highlight that we've missed out before we kind of start wrapping up? I know you're a busy guy.
I think testing, you asked for another kind of piece of counsel and piece of advice. I think I think customer service can learn from marketing and sales and other parts of the organization that can often be less rigid and more dynamic with a testing approach.
Right.
Okay. There are a few areas where this patchwork of technology is so brittly weaved together in often cases than the customer service area, and it can make folks loath to test. But I think that we are at a point where we can pull off small cohorts, 0.1%, 1%, and drive them into the tests of these emerging technologies. And those tests are proving really important because they show the data versus kind of talk about and tell the data. And I think that testing methodology has been really important. We run every new customer that we launch through a 30-day test.
Okay.
Even if they come and they say, I've seen what you've done for all your gaming clients and all your telco clients, and I'm ready to buy. We run them through a 30-day test, and we actually call it an A/B test. But we've moved away from that proof of concept,
right?
That pilot,
mm-hmm.
All of the trappings, and that say, what can we learn in 10 days?
Right.
What can we learn in 14 days? What can we learn in 30 days that will really give kind of conviction and confidence? And I think that that piece of paper, that kind of approach can be really important as well.
Has anybody ever failed that test?
Folks have failed that test. We move about over 85% of those to test, to ultimate contract.
Yeah.
In rare occasions, the ecosystem of talent around a company is not there.
Right.
Now we can qualify that going in pretty quickly. In rare cases, the technology is so outdated, and the company's resources, are so light that we can't get into a system of the late 90s.
Right.
And the like. There'll be a old CRM system in there with no APIs.
Right.
There'll be so there it is. Again, it's not. We're good at it. It's not perfect.
But you can't perform miracles.
Sometimes we go in and we try to recreate those APIs, and kind of emulate those APIs and find unpublished APIs. And but again, we've a few years doing this, we've got good at standing them up, if you will.
Perfect. So, if I may, I'd like to ask you a couple of fun questions to kind of wrap up.
Yep.
And the fun questions are surrounded that. So I'm doing a piece of I've just started it, but ongoing social research based around my this new book that I published called Punk CX. And everybody that I'm talking to, I am asking them to come up with one or two words that it's like a word association game, like one or two words that for them would describe a punk approach to CX. So if I said to you, what one or two words would come up if I said punk CX, what would you say?
I'd say rebellious. I would say counterintuitive. I would say challenging the status quo.
Perfect. And the second question was, what company or brand do you think epitomizes a punk CX ethos?
You are going to find almost none. We are at a point where that's actually interesting. Like I was speaking in the customer service space.
Yeah.
But you were potentially thinking more broadly than that. What brand epitomizes? It's funny in the part of being in the CX space, being in the customer service space. It's funny. You find a lot of grays and a lot of blues.
Yeah.
When it comes, it is, and it speaks to a kind of a new generation of thinking that is it's burgeoning right now, mm-hmm. but it hasn't quickly exploded.
No.
And we are seeing, we're seeing right now, it's funny. You can think in colors in some sense. We're seeing greens and the oranges and the yellows, come into the space, and do what Google did, with the reds and the blues and the greens and the challenging those kind of old notions of kind of convention and what could work in an enterprise setting. This has been a conservative space for a long time. And it has hurt the customer. It has been a risk-averse space for a long time, and it's hurt the customer experience. And that is starting to change, and I'm looking forward to that. And I'm looking forward to actual brands that kind of earn that punk moniker.
Awesome, I love it. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. The challenge has been set by Antony. It's like going, earn the punk kind of CX moniker.
Cool.
So, Antony, thank you for that. That's been great. I mean, so if people want to find out more about you and directly, I mean, am I assuming that it's as simple as it sounds, directly.com, is that's where they should be going to?
Directly.com will get you there, yes.
Fantastic. So final word from me is just to say a huge thank you for sharing your time and your insights and your experience with us today. I also like to thank you for the bird song in the background of your office, which has added a huge amount, a little bit of natural music to the background. So hopefully that gets picked up on the recording. But yeah, once again, thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. That's been great.
Adrian, thanks. I've really enjoyed it, and the philosophy in the book is important. So I'm excited, and congrats for that.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Well, that's it for another interview. I really hope you enjoyed it. Now, every time I complete one of these interviews, I learn something new, and I try and incorporate that new learning into my writing, my speaking, my workshops, and the consulting that I do for my clients. If you're interested, you can find out more about how I work with clients over at adrianswinsko.com. But one final thing before I go, please consider heading over to iTunes or whichever podcast platform you choose to use, and do leave a review. Every little helps, as they say. Anyway, that's all for now. Thank you for listening, and do listen in again. All the very best.